Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. I am Scott Challoner, and once again, I will be exploring a new perspective on leadership, joined each week by a different CEO, CFO, director, president, government minister, and one day, I hope, even the health secretary, whose policies are once more at the centre of debate after the government ruled that mask wearing will become compulsory for shops in England from the 24th of July. Good news, of course, if you're a fan of Halloween and the occasional masquerade ball. The aim in these interviews, however, is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and strive to make this country work. We discuss everything from that eureka moment of creativity to triumphing in the face of adversity, and of course the innovation and success that makes it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current economic and political landscape here in the UK. We'll of course be hearing from Lord Blunkett, the former Labour Education Secretary and current chairman of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland later on in the show. But first and foremost, I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Reid, the Managing Director of smart home installation firm Aonyx, based in Watford, Hertfordshire. Established in 2012 and working with both individuals and larger housing providers, Aonyx, in a few short words, aims to simplify and centralise various home systems, linking them together to be controlled in one place. But rather than hear me talking about all that, I do think it's better that we hear from the man himself. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Richard Reid onto the show. Richard, very warm welcome to you, and thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us on today's programme.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure having you on board with us, Richard. Now, we're here, of course, to talk about leadership and really bring that into focus. And I think it's fair to say that this generation of leaders, both politically and in business, is facing one of the greatest challenges of its time in the shape of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, you're a smart home installation firm in Watford with almost 30 employees. Do, of course, correct me if I'm wrong on that. How have you sort of found it navigating this last few weeks and months in the wake of the challenges the pandemic has brought about, Richard?
First of all, we've gone up to 35 employees, and it's been challenging. It really has. It's obviously from the beginning of the year up until March, it was a gradual process in terms of things beginning to close down. We worked very much within the building sector, so a lot of sites we were working on have remained open throughout the project. The challenges we had was more from how we're able to send our own team into various different projects and keeping them safe. So what we ultimately did, I think along the lines of a lot of people, is we stood down operations for a temporary period, which ended up, I think, being a couple of months. Our office crew, some were furloughed. The people that weren't furloughed worked from home, which we're still doing. Our team are back out in the field, but the rest of everyone else is working from home. I think the biggest challenge was how do we temporarily stand down, and then two, how do we then restart operations from where we left off? Because every project was at a different phase, and it meant that some projects started off quicker, some started off slower when things started to come back, and it was just fitting ourselves back into that process. But we did it. It was one thing we've tried to do. I've tried to do as a company is make sure that lines of communication are always open up throughout the company. So it doesn't matter where you sit in terms of what your position is or what you do on a day-to-day basis. Everyone has access to everyone, and we've actually used Microsoft Teams, I'm allowed to say that, so effectively for us. It's made such a difference because people can talk to everyone at any given time, and the ability for people to keep in communication with each other, we found was a very, very powerful tool. So it's challenging, yes. Impossible, no.
And what do you think the long-term effect of the pandemic will be on your industry?
I think as long as, from the different sectors that we sit across a couple of different sectors, I think as long as there is building going on, I think there will always be a need for what we do. We as much as doing the home automation, the installations and smart home, we also are quite heavily involved in ICT, so the building infrastructure of all of the information technology. So that would be door entry, access control, CCTV, landlords network, fiber aerial networks. We install the backbone. So every building that goes up utilizes all of those products. So I think as long as these buildings go on, there will always be a need for it. It will mean people will have to change how they operate. I think people will run leaner. I think people will run smarter as time goes on. But again, I'm looking at the positive, and that is that, certainly now the government has said they're going to build their way out of it. From our perspective, that hopefully will be good news.
It's certainly in the Project Speed outlined by Boris Johnson just a couple of weeks ago that the government is planning to build. That's absolutely right. And you also alluded to something as well really important there, Richard, that some features of this lockdown period, particularly with regard to working practices, could well become permanent ways that business functions in the UK. Because with regards to sustainability, there's the debate about whether people do need to continue travelling into office environments. Do you think there's really a place for that conventional office workplace in the workplace of the future?
My personal view is that the large companies with large offices and large staff numbers will gradually go. I think serviced office industry will really benefit from this. I think that a lot of people will want to work from home. They've seen the benefit of working from home. I think different technologies are available now to allow people to monitor what people do. Without infringing too much on their privacy. So I think I can talk for ourselves, and I can say that personally, I've never been busier than I have, because I am in one place at one time, and the amount of conversations and meetings that take place online every day are, they just grow and grow. And I think what will happen is people's work-life balance will change. So a lot of people I've spoken to that work for larger companies are saying they'll work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and have Monday and Friday working from home. It gives them a perceived longer weekend, but they're at home, they're working still. And I think if you take out someone's journey into work, if you take out someone's return journey, it gives them an extra couple of hours a day, whether they decide to work it or not. They're there, they're good to go. They're not going to have to worry about being delayed. And you're right, in terms of sustainability, if there's less traffic on the road, there's less pollution on the road, in the air. There's less strain on the underground, on the overground. So I think what will happen, pretty much maybe as what happened after the financial crisis, loads of new businesses were spawned after that. Came about. Uber as an example. It didn't exist before then, but after the financial crisis, there was a large amount of online businesses, and I think that's what will happen again now. I couldn't tell you what they're going to be, but companies will spawn out of this. That people will work from home more. It'll be much simpler to do it. Everyone's been forced to do it, and they've learned. I think I haven't spoken to anyone that's found it difficult to do it. So I would say it's if you take the positive out of what's happened amongst the tragedy, is that working practices will change, people's life balances maybe will change, and the planet itself might benefit from it. It's probably a bit dramatic, but I think it is a way forward.
And this, I think, is incredibly important in the context of the current climate, because all of this has really thrust the importance of this back into the limelight. Just how important do you feel that mental health and well-being is in leadership, both in terms of safeguarding your own and also looking after that of your colleagues?
Critical. It's one thing I found actually is it's quite defining the people that have actually got stronger through this and the people that have actually suffered from it. And that obviously depends on obviously the type of person and their personality. But mental health is so important within any business, and making sure that you cater and allow and have time for people that are struggling. It's something that personally I take to heart. It's something I with our own team, I'm really keen to make sure that everyone is, everyone's feeling as they should do, and that they're getting the help that they need, which is one of the reasons why we, as a company, we do twice daily Teams meetings, so that key members of staff and anyone who wants to join are able to talk to each other during the course of the day. It just means that people know everyone else is there. They can have a conversation, air their views, or they can talk to me separately, which I've had various conversations with people, because they felt pressure when maybe they wouldn't have felt it before. Working at home, the downside of working at home, as I was saying a minute ago, where you have maybe 8-9 calls a day, that's quite a bit of pressure, and you don't often get a chance to move. So for us, we don't start the day till 10, and the last call that we have is around 4:30. So people's time to themselves is more; they have more time to themselves.
And with regards to the leadership that's been seen from the government during this period, just shifting focus slightly, there's been some unprecedented measures that have come into force. Of course, the job retention scheme, which has seen millions of UK workers furloughed, of course, small business loans as well. But do you think that their leadership has been effective during this time, particularly given the amount of debate over the clarity of safety guidelines throughout, in terms of those businesses that have continued to operate and those that are going to be opening again over the course of the next few weeks and months?
I would say this. I think the government was damned if they did and damned if they didn't. We're going through something that last reared its head 100 years ago. And 100 years ago, the world was a different place. We didn't have the technological advancements we've got today. And it's very, very easy for people to be armchair critics without actually being put in the position of having all the facts at hand, which a lot of the journalists and critics have not had. So I would say, look, with the hand they've been dealt, I think they've done really, really well. You mentioned, about the schemes to help people. I mean, you're right; it's unprecedented. I mean, we've probably got the most socialist, conservative government that's ever existed, but they've done it because they want to make sure that the UK stays afloat. They've invested back into the economy, as much as they can, back into the people that have funded the economy for so long. They've given back, which is reassuring. And that, I believe and I hope, will allow in time the economy to turn around. But to answer your question, I think they've done as best as they could do. I certainly wouldn't stand here and sit and criticise, because how can you? We're 16 weeks into this now, and the numbers are coming down, the deaths are coming down. Yes, there are going to be local spikes, but as the government says, you've got to rely on people's common sense. If people can understand that because the numbers are dropping down, it doesn't mean COVID's gone away. It just means the numbers have dropped. Personally, I'm not having to shield, so I can't go out until the 1st of August. 1st of August doesn't mean COVID's disappeared. It just means that I can actually leave my house properly and go somewhere, but I still have to wear gloves, still have to wear face masks. So it's common sense. If people can use their common sense, I think things will be fine.
And would you say that there's anything that managing this pandemic from a business point of view has taught you as an individual in a leadership position?
Yeah, one of my favourite sayings that is a military saying is revise, adapt, overcome. Okay, and that has never ever been more relevant than it is now, because everyone's had to revise and adapt to how they go about their business and overcome a global reversal of the economy. And how do you do that? So you have to look at how your business runs. You have to be able to stand back and think to yourself, okay, we ran a certain way before. This is not going to be how we can run in the short term and maybe indefinitely. So how do we adjust ourselves? What do we need to do? Asking your team members, what are your views? How do you see the future going? And then pulling together opinion, being able to admit when you're doing something that is wrong, and listen to others. There's all things that I feel that you would normally want to do on a day-to-day basis, but become more and more important when faced with adversity.
I really like that response, Richard. I think you're absolutely right in the sense that people do bring the best out in themselves during times of adversity. And in fact, the whole reason I asked that initial question is because as leaders, I feel personally that one is never a finished article. We're always still learning, we're still adapting, we're still improving when we have to. And in some ways, I don't think it's really possible to become an effective employee, an effective leader without suffering setbacks, having to embrace learning curves and use that to adapt and improve. Is that something that you would certainly agree with?
100%. I mean, everyone goes through their life. No one comes out of life unscathed. It's not a straight line. Your life's like a river. It twists and turns, and you have to be able to go with it. If you don't, you'll just beat yourself. So, I mean, personally, I had cancer 5 years ago. Took the wind out of my sails. It really left me in a really, really bad position for a long time. But my view was at the time, well, what do I do? Do I lay down and die, or do I get back on my feet and fight through it? Which is what I did. And my family affected, but that to me became something that I out of tragedies, I took the positive out of it, because it made me stronger as an individual. It made me appreciate and be grateful for every day that I can get out of bed and just carry on my life, be able to see my kids and my wife. These are things that were really important in my personal life, and I've adopted that even more so into my business life. And I've invested all of me into our business to make sure that everyone who works for us gets has that I'd like to think a benefit from me, that where I can be there for them. It's adversity is what shapes a human being. It shapes you one of two ways. It either makes you stronger, or it's gonna break you. Are you a diamond, or are you glass? Diamonds are made under pressure, whereas glass cracks under it. And that's maybe a bit of a blunt statement, but it's life, and you have to either rise up to it or let it roll over you.
I think that's exactly right. I think those that have certainly triumphed in adversity during this time are certainly going to come out of the other side stronger. And in leadership roles now, we do need diamonds as opposed to glass figures. That's correct. If we actually consider the word leader for a moment, just take that aside. We talked an awful lot about leadership, but how would you actually define the word leader, Richard? What is a leader, and what ought they be?
What is a leader? In my mind, is someone that is able to bring people together. It's someone that's able to direct. It's someone that's able to oversee. It's someone that's able to stand in front and behind their team members, allowing them to tell you when you're wrong, and listening and understanding and agreeing with that, and listening to their opinion, but also making sure your opinion is known when you know what you're saying is correct. It is it's being there for people. It's not being there for people, as in when that either of those scenarios are necessary. It's being understanding. It's being able to listen. It's being able to learn, and it's being able to tell. All of these things, I think, are what goes into making someone a leader, someone who's got high morals, someone who knows the difference between right and wrong. And someone who's black and white. If you're very woolly and grey, working in grey all the time, then confusion does set in. What are you telling your people? What are you telling your team members? People need to understand clearly and concisely within the parameters of what they do, what they're doing.
And when you're an employee in a business, I suppose it's only natural at times such as this, especially, that you look up to your leaders for inspiration and direction. You look up to executives, you look up to managers. But in your position, for example, where there is nobody above you and you are the one at the helm, where do you look for that inspiration as and when you need it? What does sort of inspire you?
My team members, because every one of them is different in most ways. They're all different personalities. They have. It's watching them grow as individuals, and watching them come back and say, "Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that?" Being part of it. That I draw a lot of inspiration from. There's I don't know if I'm allowed to mention it, but there's a book that I read called Extreme Ownership, which is written by two ex-Navy SEALs, and it was really interesting. It was how they took what they learned as a Navy SEALs, experiences they went through, and then implemented that in business for different businesses. And I find that really, really interesting, because if people can learn how to react under fire, and use that in business, then there can't be any better learning. So those are probably the two areas I would draw inspiration from: my own team and people like that have lived in the world, experienced proper hardship, and survived it.
Because experience, as well as, of course, mentorship, is a huge teacher, isn't it? That's incredibly important to remember. You have to go out, you have to go and sort of have that experience. Speaking of experience, Richard, if we just sort of backtrack a little bit to earlier on in your career, can you actually pinpoint that sort of eureka moment, if you will, which made you really think that I've got enough experience here and going into business, leading a team, that's the way forward for me?
I used to, when I started out, I had a spotty start to work. I never went to university, and I went straight away working for some commercial agents, and didn't quite get it. I just went out and got a job, didn't think anything more of it, and never really enjoyed it. And then I moved around a lot until I found something I actually enjoyed doing, that I understood, and that was selling unbelievably mobile phones when they first started out. And I just realized, to use an expression from my father-in-law, how to make 1 and 1 3, just how to make money by selling them, and how to where to maximize what we were able to do. And I was put in charge of a small team to run. And when it wasn't something I went for. It was just someone said to me, "We want you to do this." So I did, and it was, I think, at that point, understanding, however immature I was at the time, and how many mistakes I made, and there were plenty, but I liked it. I liked being in that position. I felt comfortable in it. I think that was a point that at that point I decided, right, I can do this myself. And there's an expression, it takes to make an omelette, you got to break a few eggs. I broke loads, but and I still continue to, like, just to mention what you said earlier, we are never a finished article. We are always learning, and I try and go through my life on record and picking things up from people that I feel are valuable, and lessons that are valuable, so that I can try and better myself as a person. But I think that would be my eureka moment, that when I was in that position, that I was put in a position where I actually enjoyed and grew into it.
And this might seem a little bit of a mean question, but going back to that point, if you could go back that amount of time armed with all of the experience that you have now and address the younger version of yourself, is there anything that you would tell him to do differently? No,
because I wouldn't have the experience I have today. Any mistake I've made, I don't regret them. People around me might, my wife might, but no, I don't, because you cannot learn without making a mistake. I mean, one of the things I'm keen to stress with our team is that, go and do what you need to do. Go and make a mistake. Don't worry about falling, because I'll catch you. Just don't ever repeat it. And, and that gives people the freedom to go and do what they're going to do, because people, we're all human beings. We're all going to make mistakes, either inadvertently, carelessly, whatever it is, we're all going to make mistakes. So I'd rather someone learn from them than someone being constantly told what to do, be on a very rigid track and not be able to think outside the box. That's a personal view, but I hope it doesn't sound arrogant, but I wouldn't change a thing.
I can certainly see where you're coming from there, Richard, because there's a lot of merit in that approach of giving people the independence to go out of their own comfort zones, push the boundaries, try things for themselves, and then learn from the mistakes that they do make, because it's counterproductive, on the other hand, just being there constantly over their shoulder, telling them what to do, because with that, they're never going to really develop, are they? Correct.
And also you find out what people are like, and there are some people that just can't cut it, that continue to make mistakes, and then you find out quick enough that they're just not for you. And we've, over a period of years, we have refined our team so that it only ever gets stronger and stronger, which benefits. It's not just from my point of view, but it benefits everyone.
Exactly right. And thinking of course, just how hectic the world of running a business can actually be in any context, let alone at a time such as this. And we've already talked about mental health there, Richard, but when you do need to sort of just switch off as somebody running a business, how easy do you find it just to do that and relax when you need to?
My saving grace has always been boxing. I love exercise, and boxing is probably one of the best exercises you can do. I'm not about to get in a ring. I'm no professional by any stretch, but I enjoy the actual physical side of it, and that to me is my release. That other exercise I do during the week, that is more than enough for me to lighten the load, shall we say?
Because I think people, of course, can really get caught up in the sort of the everyday sort of hectic world of running a business. And sometimes you can kind of forget that sometimes even at the top of the tree, you do need to sort of take a little bit of time to yourself every so often, don't you? And it's good to sort of have that release. And anyone listening into this who's starting out in business, or at least hoping to, I think that's one of the best pieces of advice you can give as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. You've got to have some time for yourself. Look, I find personally, my mind is a lot clearer when I've exercised, because I've just got rid of whatever I've been through the day before or that day. My mind is clear. And at that point, if your mind is clear, things pop in your head that you would maybe not necessarily think about. And all of a sudden you might just brainstorm something and think, that's a really good idea. I'm going to do that. And that's clarity. So what do you get? You get clear mind, you get a fit body, and you get you're maintaining a way of life that is healthy. And and even putting all of that aside, you mentioned mental health. I think this is so key. The how you feel after you train is. We're going a bit off topic here, but how you feel after you train is so good that I think if people. Some people took exercise more seriously, and in whatever form it was, swimming, running, tennis, golf, whatever it was, it's the time that they can switch off. It's an hour or 2 hours where they're not actually thinking about what's bothering them. And then one thing I'm keen to tell our team is that when things do get hard, stop what you're doing, go out, go for a walk, go and clear your head, take a step back, and then relook at it later on. Because when you keep going at something and you can't get it done, you're never going to get it done. You're going to end up doing the same thing over and over again. So you stop and clear your head. And exercise is great for that.
And sort of similarly to that, we talk about, of course, sort of reiterating the importance of mental health, taking a step back sometimes for those people who are starting out as employees, starting out as business leaders. But what other advice would you give to a young person who was looking to start their first day in a leadership role?
Be determined, be gritty, and know what you need to do. Accept the advice of others. Listen to what other people tell you. You don't know everything. No one does. And accept the fact that even as a leader, you're going to make mistakes. Accept who you are. Okay. Accept where your limitations are. Accept where your strengths are. One thing I learned early on is that you work to your strengths and you employ to your weakness. Okay. Because no one knows everything. No one can do everything. It's why in government you have a prime minister or a president, and then you have ministers around for different areas, because they will oversee different parts of the UK economy and so on and so forth. And then the prime minister or president will have report-ins that will then allow to have conversations take place. Things get discussed. Things get agreed, rightly or wrongly. And that you need in business as well. You need to be able to have, as your business grows, you need to have the right management team beneath you to allow you to grow the business. The management team is what will take over when you get to a point where you need to then move up the chain and take it further. You can't be chief cook and bottle washer all the time. You need to have a business plan. You need to say, right, I want to be here in a year, in 3 years, and in 5 years. You may not hit it, but you need to have something to aim for, so that you know the sort of milestones that you're going to be hitting along the way that will help you get to where you want to get to. And I think most of all is get out every day and just say to yourself, I'm going to be successful. Money is a byproduct of success. Just be the success. Be the best person you can be. Go at it. Smash it. Do whatever it is you need to do, but just listen as well.
And thinking now about the future, I think it only serves that we discuss that, Richard, having reflected an awful lot on the past today. Over the next 12 to 18 months, it's going to be an incredibly challenging time for business, adjusting to the new normal of the COVID-19 situation, of course, but also raging away in the background are the Brexit trade negotiations. We're still no closer to knowing whether we will have a deal in place with the European Union by the end of the year. So with all of that in mind, what do you envision being on the horizon for yourself and for Aonyx, and what do you really hope to achieve over the next 12 to 18 months as a business?
I think the next 12 months, so from January next year onwards, I think will be a very, very challenging year because of the points you just raised. There could be a second, third spike even with COVID, Brexit negotiations. You need to look at what you read in the news and read between the lines, because you've got some people saying we're going to come out with no deal. Some people saying, yeah, a deal might be possible. It's very difficult. It is very uncertain. So you need to plan. I think as a business, you need to plan for the worst and move around it. From our point of view, because we are in the building sector, as long as building is still going on, we just need to make sure that we are visible to whoever is doing the building, so that we can continue to grow. And to continue to win business. I think that is the most important thing. And just being mindful of what's going on in the background, making sure your reserves and your business are strong enough to be able to tide you through if you get a couple of 2, 3, 4, 5 lean months. Making sure that your staff are working optimally, making sure you're not running too fat or too lean in terms of the amount of staff that you have. I think it is just something we've done with what's going on now is a top to bottom look at the business and saying, right, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? And what do we need to change to make us that much more flexible?
Certainly plenty to get your teeth into over the course of the next year then, Richard, I think it's fair to say.
Most definitely.
And, given how informative it's been having you come onto the programme to discuss leadership with us and also your experience of this crisis thus far and your future plans, I actually think it would be fantastic to catch up and have you back on the show with us at some point in the next year, just to see at that point how things are shaping up, see where we are as a country and as a society at that point, and hopefully there'll be some real positive news to share.
I would absolutely love that, and yes, I sincerely hope so. That's what we're aiming for. So yes, definitely. Thank you.
Of course, there are a great many variables, so it's all well and good speculating at this point, but it's another thing entirely, of course, reconvening once we know what's happened and we can assess where we are. Richard, I must say, it's been a real pleasure having you join us on the show today. And most importantly, until we do speak again in future, please do continue to take care and stay safe with all still going on. That's
pretty cool. May I just say one thing, just to finish off? If that's okay?
Of course, yes.
When I was going through treatment, you scanned they take your blood test, you know exactly where you are at every given stage. And when I came out of that, I knew what the health was of my body. I knew where I was. I knew what I did and didn't have. Okay, and we're now in the same position with business. We know we're about to go through Brexit. We now know the effects of COVID. So to a degree, we're actually in a slightly better position because we do know what's going on, as opposed to being in the dark and something coming out of nowhere, as COVID did. So if you can accept what is going on, accept the changes that are about to happen, you will get through it.
And I think that's one of the soundest pieces of advice that anybody tuning into this can take away. And also a final message for those listeners listening from me. Please do continue to be sensible, look after yourselves, look after others, and stay safe, because it really does make a tangible difference in saving lives during this time. I was speaking today to Richard Reid, Managing Director of Aonyx. I hope you all enjoyed the interview and, of course, learning more about how the whole team at the Aonyx business is continuing to raise standards even throughout this most challenging time. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Matthew O'Neill for his exclusive interview with former Education Secretary Lord Blunkett. Lord Blunkett is today an active member of the House of Lords, a former Labour MP and Secretary of State, and Chairman of the Leaders' Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Despite being blind from birth, Lord Blunkett rose to prominence to become one of the most renowned politicians of his generation, holding a number of senior positions in the cabinet of then Prime Minister Tony Blair and serving as the MP for his Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough constituency for 28 years. He was elevated to the House of Lords in August 2015 as Baron Blunkett of Brightside and Hillsborough. And I hope that you enjoy listening just as much as Matthew relished the opportunity to speak with him. All of that is, of course, coming up next.
Lord Blunkett, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with you.
Well, of course, nothing is being said at the moment other than COVID-19, which we must touch on. What would your message be to small businesses who are trying to keep going?
Well, I think the last ones standing will be the ones that thrive when we get back to some sort of normality. So it's have confidence and courage. Obviously, take advantage as far as you can of the government help. I think that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has gone about as far as you could have expected in the circumstances. There are obviously small businesses that fall between the cracks. Those who don't have defined premises can't benefit from the business rate waiver, have not really been able to demonstrate that they can adhere to the PAYE for furloughing staff, and of course whether they can receive the grant, 10,000 or 25,000. All of those who can are obviously able at least to benefit from that for the time being and look to the future. But I think the second thing to say, and they don't need me to tell them this as a politician who did once do a business studies qualification, which is that it will be a different world, and being able to think about how that world will look in a year's time and be creative about it and learn from not just what's happening to you at this moment in time, but to others around you and the sector that you're working in, that will be really important.
Do you feel that the long-term effects of the COVID-19 outbreak will in some ways be positive for British industry?
Well, only in the sense that people are having to be creative, they're having to adjust and innovate. Therefore, they're thinking about more productive, if you like, greater productivity ways of delivering the same service or delivering the same products. And in that sense, I think we'll have temporarily at least very much higher unemployment than we've become used to, but we'll probably have a burst of productivity, which will help with the recovery. Whether it will help with the inequity of the way in which our economy is imbalanced, both between services and productivity and the production of goods and services, I'm not sure. What we will need to try and do is to ensure that the geographic imbalance that exists is, as far as humanly possible, is dealt with by both the entrepreneurship and innovation from the bottom up and targeted government help, which will still be needed. And we are now in the throes of the kind of borrowing that we saw back in 2008 to save the banking and economic system. We're having to do that to save the whole of our productive business and commerce, and I think that will have to be sustained for some time.
Do you feel that people will take a second look at global supply chains in the wake of this outbreak?
I think there's going to be much more creative ways of using local supply and linking up inside sectors much more effectively. And I hope that the Leaders' Council will be able to play a part in that, in the sense that people who have something in common, a synergy in terms of what they're delivering, whether it's a service or whether it's manufacturing or whatever, will be able to see that there's a good outcome from knowing the sector better, linking with people, not just geographically, locally, but those in this country who may not have been on the radar in terms of what they produced for the supply chain. And of course, ensuring, because there's quite a lot of fraud going on as we speak with people getting into cyber attacks, that they'll also take account of going into the cyber security side effectively as well. The more we are online, the more people who are working from home, the more vulnerable those businesses and their supply chain become. And that's something to think about as well.
How important is strong leadership at the moment?
Well, I actually think that it's brought to the fore leadership in a whole range of areas, from obviously government itself, and there's been ups and downs with the Prime Minister's severe illness, but all the way through the public and private sector, people have, to use the jargon, stepped up, and they've shown local, regional, national level the kind of leadership that Britain historically was very good at. Regrettably, we've not seen the same on the international scene for all kinds of reasons, but maybe we will in future. So I think out of this will come experience of people who have seen an opportunity to do good, as well as seen an opportunity to provide a good a service or goods, including, for instance, shortages for the health and social care system, the food chain and the like, but also I think in terms of seeing the synergy between the private and the voluntary sector and using people's commitment to each other in a very positive way. I'm not sentimental about this. Things will revert. But actually, I think there's a kind of moment of moral judgment of people feeling that they've got a role to play outside the immediate survival that they're engaged in. And if we can hang on to a little bit of that social responsibility, that will be a very positive outcome.
Absolutely. Now, what's your broad view of how the government is responding to this? Are you broadly supportive of their measures?
Well, it may surprise people to hear that I have been very supportive. Of course, there's been legitimate criticisms about the speed of response on protective equipment and on issues relating to testing. But my own view is very similar to the challenge that was made to the Prime Minister of Italy when people said, why didn't you close Italy down faster? And he said, a fortnight before we did it, I would have been considered to be a madman and nobody would have agreed to do it if I'd tried to move too quickly. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on here in the UK. We may have seen the signals elsewhere across the world and taken them more seriously at the time. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but as someone who's had his life in the opposite political party to the present government, I think that with some hiccups and mistakes, they've not done a bad job in what has been incredibly difficult circumstances.
And you're absolutely right. In a liberal democracy that we live in, it's very difficult for people to swallow orders given to them from government.
Well, the UK and the US, and to some extent the Scandinavian countries, have a very different history and therefore interest in maintaining the freedom to decide and the persuasion and consent that's required. Those countries that have experienced one way or another totalitarianism over the last century have a slightly different way of coming at this. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think that that's why getting the balance right of getting people to go along with what you want them to do in their interests as well as the nation as a whole is a sensible, proportional balance. And I think we now need to adjust to the coming out of the crisis gradually, readjusting to recovery in the same way.
Now, something you've mentioned recently on this balance is the police overreach in the enforcement of the COVID-19 structures that have been put in place. What have they done right, and where have they gone too far?
Well, I think that they were interpreting what was not necessarily as clear advice as it might have been for all kinds of reasons, because people were feeling their way. I think what's come out of it has been a demonstration by local police services in some parts of the country that they could get people to do what was needed without the heavy hand of drones overhead or people being told that they shouldn't be walking in the street, because this was all about self-isolation, not incarceration. It was about getting people not to pass the infection on to each other and therefore to provide distance rather than to make our lives a misery. Those police services that adopted that policing by consent and chivying people along did really well. Those who went over the top, I think, soon got a very substantial pushback. And one of the strengths of our democracy is that you could have that debate. People could say, I'm terribly sorry, we think the police force in our area has gone over the top. And that in itself is a constraint and a readjustment. That's another strength of living in a country where you can have opinions and express them without actually being thought to be a fool.
Now, of course, the government has faced criticism that they were slow to react, and Boris Johnson wasn't present at the early COVID-19 COBRA meetings. Now, Number 10 has claimed that this is normal practice. The health secretary often chairs corporate meetings related to health. Does this tally with your experience as a Secretary of State, or would you have expected the PM to be more hands-on during the initial stages?
I think different prime ministers do have a very different style. And Boris's style, which I think will now be considerably adjusted, was very swashbuckling. In some senses, delegating is a good thing, as every leader of every business or public service knows. Those who try to pull too much into themselves end up with a massive bottleneck, great failure of trust, and the inability of people to show what they're worth and to demonstrate their capability. So I'd be very wary of jumping in and saying he was wrong to delegate the essential COBRA meetings. What I was surprised about was that he didn't chair the first couple, because my experience with Tony Blair for the 8 years I was in Cabinet was that Tony was a great delegator, but he would get a grip to begin with, watch what the difficulties were, and then give people direction and confidence to be able to get on with it. So looking back, I think Boris himself probably thinks, God, I wish I'd spotted the signals from elsewhere in the world more rapidly, and I'd just been there. However, this also raises another issue. All of us in positions of leadership need good teams around us. I think after this is over, he will be assessing those who really did step up and those who demonstrated their inadequacy. I think we'll probably end up in a year's time with a much stronger cabinet than we have today.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we've seen a significant drop in the visibility of certain special advisors like Dominic Cummings during this entire period. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out.
Well, it's certainly readjusted the role of those behind the scenes with those who should be taking the decisions, having received advice. Obviously, there's been a complete transformation in the profile of experts, if I might use that term, who'd previously been denigrated. Scientists, medics, people with behavioral science understanding. My only criticism was, were we getting wide enough advice? Were we narrowing it too much to a couple of key centres in London? But that's because I've always been adverse to everything being London-centric. I think there's great expertise, wisdom, experience out in the sticks, and we should use it.
Rightly so. Now, was pandemic planning part of your time as a minister, particularly perhaps when you were Home Secretary?
Well, it was, but it was on the back of risk arising out of counter-terrorism measures.
Right.
I was the Home Secretary for 3 months when the attack took place in September 2001 on the World Trade Center and beyond. We did an enormous amount of scenario planning, both desktop and real. On the back of that, it was very heavily orientated to future developing terrorism risk. I certainly got involved with talking about pandemics. I remember being at a seminar in Edinburgh where the university there had done a lot of work itself on the issue of pandemics. And of course, we saw SARS and other things emerging. I think people have criticised the government for not picking up the report from 2015, 5 years ago. I think that what happens is human nature kicks in. You deal with what you're immediately faced with. You can sponsor reports, and this is true of business planning, of course, as well, and scenario planning for what business continuity will look like, recovery plans for business, what will happen if there's a cyber attack, what happens if there's an energy shutdown. These kind of things you can look at, but you're immediately turning your eyes to what's in front of you. And had we picked up a bit more on the danger from Ebola and SARS and what have you in the past, then we might have said, what if something hits us in the developed nations that we don't have a vaccine for, that we can't immediately whisk up protective materials or equipment, or for that matter, medicines that help with recovery, all of which we now see are a danger. I think this will make an enormous difference to the planning for the years ahead. I hope it will be widened so that we don't just look at what's happened, but very rarely do you see something exactly repeat itself. Some of the circumstances will be, but others won't. So that's why I've put emphasis in what I talk about on looking at the other virus, the cyber attack scenario, which could be just as dangerous in a world of just-in-time provision. One of the miracles of the modern developed world, except for the very poor, has been the distribution of food. A lot of it on computerized, technologically advanced systems. If that were to come down, we'd be in real trouble. So I think we need to think those sort of scenarios as well.
So have a full plan across both sectors, biological warfare, pandemics, and cyber warfare.
Yes, and to do so on different levels. I think, again, thinking global but acting local, we need a lot more to think about what would happen if something took shape that actually broke down those national and global chains and how we would cope. And without, obviously, we've got enough fear and anxiety to last a lifetime. Without creating even more anxiety, we can think about those things for the future in a more rational way, I think.
Now, aside from the physical threat of the virus, one of the things that people are vastly worried about is the effect on the economy, not just national economy, but also the world economy. Now, it has been said by certain parties, and I'd like to garner your thoughts on this. Is there a danger of the effects of the lockdown being even worse than those of the virus?
Were it be prolonged, I fear that balance would tip the other way. It is about proportionality. It is about balance. It's the wisdom of Solomon, really, to get the moment right when you start to move and then to move quickly. There's no doubt whatsoever that we are stocking up, not just on the economic and employment front, which will be devastating enough, but on the health and social well-being front, enormous challenges, and they will need careful handling because there's a lot of people whose lives, for a variety of reasons, are at risk in the future on a scale that we've been dealing with over the immediate handling of the pandemic, concentrating really hard on those affected by COVID-19, those sadly who have died or been seriously incapacitated. That will roll over into the economic, the social, the mental health and cultural well-being of the nation, and that will need all of us to pull together as well.
Absolutely. Now, do you believe the government's doing enough for business?
I think that the speed of reaction once the scale of the pandemic was clear was very good. I've praised Rishi Sunak for his action. Remember, a chancellor who only just come into office was planning to deliver the budget in the middle of March and has had at least three equivalent budgets since. I think he's handled it very well. Understandably worried now about what we're doing to our economy. The level of borrowing is sustainable because of low interest rates, but it reaches a point, of course, where it tips over so that you can't then do the kind of structural investment requirements that the government were laying out before and in the March budget. And those will have their consequences as well as a planned payback over many years. I think we've learned something over the last few months. We needed to take immediate action. We don't want another round of austerity equivalent from 2010 through to 2019. I don't think the nation, on the back of what's happened and the challenges we have, could take that. And therefore, we need a different plan, economic plan, over a much longer period, just as we did from the Second World War all the way through to 2002, when the final American loans were paid off.
Now, of course, one thing that's on everyone's lips. How much longer do you believe that the lockdown can go on for?
I believe that we need to be substantially back in action as an economy in June. This obviously is led in terms of places where people would meet in large numbers, having to adjust to the fact that it will be longer for them. And sadly, that will involve business closures. It's why the Chancellor extended the furlough scheme to the end of June. Mm-hmm. But unless we get things moving in June, I think we'll run into the summer where all kinds of services and industries will have a chain reaction effect. And what happens with one will then have a major impact on another. And then you get the skittle effect where things get knocked down that you hadn't perceived were going to be affected. So I very much, if I were in government, and I always think of things in that context, what would I do if I were in government? I would be on the side from the second week in May, on the side of the hawks in terms of saying we've got to start moving, and we've got to do so with the collaboration and cooperation of the public who have got the message, who did behave, who responded magnificently. Let's try and get back, perhaps, doing things differently for a time, but substantially getting back to business as usual. And unless we do that, then those areas that can't and wouldn't expect to be back in action immediately get pushed further into the middle of the year and the autumn, and then they become unsustainable.
Now, of course, one of the other major developments we've had recently are the changes in the Labour Party. So if we could just speak on the Labour Party for a while. This might sound like an obvious question, but how does Sir Keir differ from Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I'm biased because I believe the Labour Party has come out of 4.5 years of a black hole of a nightmare, where it neither represented a credible opposition nor an electable government, and the combination was to let those who supported the Labour Party and needed some of its policies let them down very badly. Sir Keir Starmer both is a highly intelligent, professional lawyer who, as Director of Public Prosecutions, led the service well, had to take difficult decisions at a time of austerity, understands the world beyond Labour members, but has been able to do business with those who originally supported Jeremy Corbyn and was able to command support from them. His creation of a balanced shadow ministerial team has been very encouraging. I supported Lisa Nandy, who he's made Shadow Foreign Secretary, because I thought she understood the north of England and the disaffected former Labour voters. But I believe that Sir Keir has taken on board those who have something really sensible to offer. And I believe he will be both a great leader of the opposition. More importantly, he will then present himself as a credible alternative prime minister. And all governments need an alternative government at their shoulder. It was true of us from 97, and it took the Conservatives some time to recover and to get to that position, but they did, and the Labour Party will, and that's crucial for our democracy. All of us need to understand and appreciate that a living, breathing, functioning democracy requires a credible, confident, and in many ways supportable opposition, as well as a government that we clearly want to do well, because none of us want, as we didn't with the COVID crisis, none of us want the government to fail. We want to see our economy recover. We want our social well-being to be taken into account. We want to overcome deep-seated inequality and poverty. And we want to do it with enterprise and entrepreneurship and business playing their role. And that is about leadership nationally, locally, in the private and the public sector, people with ideas, with confidence, with the ability to pull teams around them, above all, to have some idea of what it is they want to achieve and a very good idea as to how to achieve it.
Now, of course, one of the biggest problems Secure is facing will be tackling the party's anti-Semitism problem. There has been a recent internal report that has been quite damning. What's your response to that report, and what does Secure need to do in response?
Well, there are two reports. One which is being produced by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which he will, and has already indicated, will implement in full. The second was a leaked report put together by the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, 800 pages of private interchanges on social media, which he has, Keir Starmer, set up an investigation to identify who did it, who leaked it, what the content was, does it have any salience and lessons for us, and where necessary, action will be taken. So I hope that as he moved very quickly to reassure the Jewish community, so he will be able to take the necessary steps to back up that reassurance with the kind of actions that says that this was a blight on a historic, great political party that all of us were ashamed of. We've been able to put that behind us and to move on to facing the future with confidence.
What's the one key thing that Secure needs to do to restore Labour as an election-winning party?
I think Sir Keir Starmer's major challenge is to convince sceptical voters that Labour has not only reverted to a party that they can support because they can see it acting, developing, presenting as a credible alternative government, but also that the lessons have been learned from the fiasco from 2015 onwards. In other words, there have to be very clear signals of substantial change, not just the right words, not just reassurance that we're not going back to some of the crazier policies, but actually that we've understood why the electorate rejected those policies so substantially in December 2019. If people get that message, they'll understand that the Labour Party has changed, as it did in the 1980s and early 90s, to become the electable government with the greatest majority in historic majority, even greater than 1945, which I was privileged to be able to take advantage of in 1997 when I joined the cabinet.
Now, I know what your answer is going to be to this question, but indulge me. Do you think Secure has what it takes to be PM?
Yes, I do. I think he has the background, he has the experience, he has the professionalism, he has the forensic mindset, and he has the confidence to have put a team around him which will ensure that it will work. And those elements are true of all leaders. Ideas, the ability to build a team, to have confidence in that team, and to be able to demonstrate leadership in practice, sometimes at the most difficult times. And, you know, the Leaders' Council, those sharing their thoughts with the kind of thing that we're doing now with a podcast, but also joining us in linking up in that network of people who can support and help each other and learn from each other. That is what needs to be done in politics as it needs to be done in business. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew.
Well, thank you for coming on the program. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all those listening in what has been a nightmare scenario. Good luck for the future. Have courage, have confidence, and yes, listen to those who know more about business than I ever will.
Thank you, Lord Blunkett.
Thank you.
As always, it has been a pleasure listening to and learning from our guests. I've been your host, Scott Challoner, and I hope that you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'll be back in the newly reopened Westminster Arms and raising a socially distanced glass to raising standards. Remember, although we are seeing things slowly returning to normal, do continue to be sensible. Look after yourselves and others, because it really does make a huge difference in keeping people safe and saving lives. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.